Somebody has a physically distressed house. There's about 4 or 5 reasons why they have a physically distressed house. One of them, obviously, may be financial. They don't have the money to upkeep it. They may be an older couple or older individual that doesn't have the money to, put it into landscaping or mulch every year, or pay for the painter or the roof. So money may be a motivator or an obvious roadblock to them maintaining that asset. So that's like the first trigger to why somebody's house is distressed. The second trigger to why people's houses are distressed is pure laziness. They're just not an organized person. They're all over the place. They may be busy with work. They may be a semi-truck driver that's out of town 3 or 4, weeks out of the month. But when it comes to prioritizing their time, maintenance of their property or upkeep of their property or attention to detail to that property is not a priority in their life. So I say laziness in a way where I'm not trying to say that everybody who has a bad house is lazy, but it's not a priority that's most likely motivated by laziness. The third aspect to understand about distressed homes is that it could be substance abuse. It could be alcoholism. It could be that when they get off work, they're not interested in mowing the yard. They're interested in going to the bar and drinking, or they're interested in doing whatever it is. But there's some psychological block that's happening between my property value, maintaining it, and I have issues. Then there's probably the fourth psychology of what really distress. It could be mental illness, depression. It could be anxiety. It could be like, I'm just super flustered and I just don't prioritize these things. I'm not lazy, but it's not what I spend my time on because I have other issues going on. And then the fifth reason why people have distressed homes is that there is no person living in the home, and that property is either vacant or has renters that don't care about the upkeep, but the actual landlord or property owner may be absentee or is not familiar with what that property is status or condition is. And I would beg to argue with anybody that I know tons of landlords who haven't seen their own properties maybe in 1, 2, 3 years. And I can say that because my neighbors directly across the street have a car on blocks and have like piles of trash in their backyard, and their landlord's in California. So, and they're the only eyesore in the entire neighborhood. So everyone's talking about them. So when you look at all of these distressed motivators, how do you create a script or a phone call or an email or a text message that doesn't just pick one of those triggers and go deep on it, but takes all of those triggers into consideration and then creates a dialogue that may either cover some sort of solution to those psychological issues or motivators or objections. So what I mean by this is if we're calling a distressed house, hey, we were in your neighborhood, we're looking for an investment property for our next project, and I noticed that your house needed a little bit of work. And I'm not saying that to be negative, but we're always looking for projects where we can do remodeling or we can do any type of upkeep. And I just wanted to see if you would be interested in either us looking at your house or providing you a referral to a contractor that may be able to help you with that roof, whatever it is. But the dialogue to those specific data sets is got to be in line with what possibly could be the problem. And then the solution to what you're offering them could be, I'll pay for your moving truck, or I'll pay for an estate company to clean out your house. I'll pay for you to have a case of beer because it looks like you like to drink beer, whatever it is, right? But being able to tailor your message to each and every one versus building a postcard that is just boilerplate that goes to everybody that you think is distressed, but doesn't actually motivate anybody in any of those targets or motivators. So understanding that in that reverse aspect is what I try to tell everybody before you're going to call anybody or send any direct mail. And Ed's probably got a good lesson of this as we've developed direct mail campaigns, that I'm always like, let me think about this a second. Like, what, who are we talking to? And like, what is going to be a motivator of what people are actually going to be responsive to? And sometimes that's abruptness. That's like sending a direct mail that is very direct. Like, please don't call me, waste any of my time. If you got what I'm looking for, call this number. I got cash now. Or throw this in the trash can. You can even make it funny. But understanding what that message is really, really important. And the difference between sending out 1,000 mailers or spending 10 hours on the phone and converting 1 or 2 customers or 10 or 15 customers. And I think that's the biggest conversion factor, is somebody who works as a VP of growth and sales. I'm always looking at who is that 1, 2, or 3 type of distress property, not probate, not tax default, but what type of person is in that house. And then what does that message have to address? So if you're dealing with foreclosures or notices of default, which we have none, basically, there's been like 3, that message or dialogue or script is going to be way more compassionate to, hey, you're about to lose your house. I want to buy it from you. Let me solve all these problems. Versus calling and asking the questions of like, is there any way I can help you? Is there anything that we can create an action plan or a game plan in order to get you somewhere else? Hey, help you find a rental, right? But I want to be able to bridge that gap between what your problem is and how I can solve that for you. And I think even when we look at realtor templates for foreclosures, they don't even address that in depth. It's more or less like, hey, here's a solution. It's a short sale. It's complicated, so call me. So I wanted to really touch base on, when it comes to notice of default and pre-foreclosure properties, it's way more compassionate to their situation, and the psychology behind that has to be addressed. I don't think anybody who's ever been foreclosed isn't thinking there is some serious issues with my evaluation of my life and my financial status. And that has to go with divorce. That has to go with any type of financial burden. So don't send the same message or have the same script to your distressed properties that may be some of these issues to a specific data set that you pulled that is this issue. Once you've identified what the issue is, that's where the psychology of what would you be responsive to if you were them. That's what I always ask all of my employees. I always say, let's talk about this. If I was to call you, what would get you to do something with me? And let's list all these reasons on the whiteboard. And you'd be amazed by just doing that little exercise, those little things that you can package up and put a little bow on and then deliver, is what really motivates people to pick up the phone and be like, hey, I got your letter. There's some things that you made me start to think about, and you answer some good questions that I have. So that's distress, that's pre-foreclosure. When it comes to probate, now this could be on the real estate side or the investment side, but when it comes to probate properties, okay, probate properties are very complex because you're dealing with somebody just had a loss. So me and Ed have dealt with this, and Ed, if you want to chime in on this, can be some of the most stressful investment type deals.
Yep.
Almost to the point of delusional conversation, almost to the point of not logical paths of operation, forgetting major details, almost quasi, what's the word I'm looking for? Dementia. It's like a periodic dementia that's happening. Like, I am so overwhelmed. There's so much coming at me. What do you mean I got to talk to a lawyer? What do you mean I got to pay money? What do you mean, how much money am I going to get out of this estate? Like, there's financial, there's emotional, and then there's also extreme uncertainty of where the process is going. So when it comes to probate properties, there's the biggest advice I could give from a psychology standpoint is patience. There's a period of time in which you can't be a pushy investor or sign on the dot or on the line, whatever it is. You have to be patient to the circumstance, be able to work with multiple properties and people, and being able to be the quarterback of coordination. And I think that is what's so hard as an investor, because we're like, hey, we need this contract. We want to get this house under wraps, but we can't. Now there's a roadblock. What do you mean the sister doesn't want to sell it to me? Oh, wait, the brother's arguing with the sister now because he wants to sell it to us, but the sister doesn't want to. But the sister knows a realtor, so maybe we should bring the realtor in. Maybe the realtor's coming in, and then it's a gigantic snowball that ends up crashing or ends up being thrown, whatever it is. So
Be very complicated.
Yes.
Dan and I have even gone down to down the road of good cop, bad cop, right? With a Germany property, right? So the owner, whereas you got to navigate it very carefully. You know, where Dan came into it, he was a bad cop and I was the good cop. So it was like, yay. But you have to be very compassionate and very empathetical to their needs. And you just have to care, right? So you have to navigate that very carefully. And like Dan and I are good at working together and observing and crafting different scripts and proposals and how to deal with those people carefully to suit their needs, right? What do they need as a person? You know, one property owner needs to have a heavy heart to relay their message and their pain from. Others need different things, right? So you just have to listen carefully, right?
Yeah, that's good points. I think what that good cop, bad cop scenario really tailors into is that just because it's a probate situation and it's in a high emotional environment, you have to still be able to negotiate, right? You don't want to overpay for a property. Like, oh, I feel bad for you. Your dad died. Let me pay 30 grand more than what it should. So there's this aspect of how you dialogue the negotiation and how you can back off or support that case, right? Another property that we had, we didn't know, but I wanted to bring this up in terms of psychology. Speculation in this investment game, or as a real estate agent, speculation 8 times out of 10 is mostly correct. Your premonition of what you think is happening is most likely somewhere in line with probably what's happening. And we didn't know that the seller was engaged or married. I can't remember. I think engaged. And they were having like marital problems, but he didn't want her to get the property. So he's leaving her out of all the negotiations. And we're like, we met her once, but is she involved? And then like the title came and the whole deed transfer and all that. And she was nowhere to be found, but he was now living in Portland. So some of this has to do with being able to ask the right questions, like, hey, what's going on in your life? Like, are you married? Right? And not making it overly intrusive, but being able to ask the right questions so you don't get to a point where you're like, oh, you don't even own this property. Your dad does. Oh, wait, now we got to talk to your dad. Oh, my dad doesn't want to do this. Now I just wasted 2 hours. So when it comes to probate or interfamily transfer of property, just heavily rely on your senses and asking good questions and being extremely patient. Having compassion as well, but I think that kind of nails that. Now, moving on to a different type of property. If you're dealing with any bank-owned properties or any financial institution or investment company that's trying to unload tear downs or any type of development or land, always ask yourself the one question that you probably still ask yourself when you get a wholesale deal from a wholesaler. The first question you should always ask yourself is, why didn't you flip this property? That's the very first question. And reputable wholesalers, what you'll learn is reputable wholesalers are usually only wholesalers for 2 or 3 years. And then they become flippers and house investors. And now they're not wholesalers anymore, but they still use the wholesale marketing to get their own supply and demand. And once in a while, you'll see a wholesale deal from them, but you know they passed on that deal. That's the reason they're wholesaling. So that's the same type of psychology I want you to say to yourself when it comes to banks or larger investment firms or anybody who you know is looking at a multifamily property near a college campus, which has probably been analyzed by every single investment analysis, big hedge fund company. And you're asking yourself, like, why is this 45 unit apartment complex right next to a university in a great location never been sold or never been offered a purchase price from a bigger investor or syndication company? Oh, it needs like $3 million in work. That's why it's easier to tear it down and build a high rise. So that psychology of understanding where you are in the logic path of what the end result of that property is versus where you're evaluating that property and asking yourself, why are they really selling this property to me? And I wanted to kind of go into that because it goes into the real estate spectrum and as well as the investment spectrum. I talk about this a lot on social media. You can't sell investment properties. Well, you can in a hot market, but you can't sell investment properties on what you think the property is worth. Like, I bought it for 1 million. I think it's worth 2.5 to 3. I ran some calculations on it and it's like worth 2.75. So let's list it for 3.3. Anybody who's not purchasing this, you need to understand the psychology of the buyers as a seller. Smart investors who have liquid capital, who don't need to use a bank and it doesn't have to go through an appraisal process, are going to look at your $3.3 million listed property. And the first thing they're going to say to you is, scroll over. You're crazy. Your valuation's way off. Or they're going to ask you for financial records that are going to justify their 2.750 valuation, which is the offer that they're going to send you all cash. But when you can't understand that, when you don't bring into psychology of like, hey, before I list this, who's probably the most probable buyer? That's what you always have to ask yourself as a real estate agent and as an investor. Who is the most probable buyer? And that goes to flipping houses too, like especially the price point. And this price point, I have this house flip. Who is most probably their down payment, what type of loan they're going to use, and how many of those people exist that are looking in this market right now. I'll tell you a trick. You can look on Zillow, save properties, look at how many saves. That'll tell you a rough estimate of what people are doing. But the psychology of the buyer is super important because the more preparation, the more proof you can put together, package it up, and you understand that your cash buyer is going to want 275 to 295. You know, you can start your negotiations. You listed at 3.3, but when you have buyers that reach out and ask for the due diligence, I'm open to dialogue. Let's talk. That is the number one problem in both investing and real estate agent deal structure. And this has to do 100% with psychology. Keeping the dialogue channel open, being able to use little words like, I'm open to offers, let's talk about it, versus that's the price and I don't have any documentation. Now you just removed about 33% of your potential buyers that probably would have given you 2.8, 2.9, but they didn't want to deal with you. because you didn't do the homework first and you didn't prepare in the psychology of a buyer. And I think that is super imperative, because I was reading an article and they said that in a seller's market, you don't really have to deal with this that much. People are going to buy things for dumb prices. People are going to try to hoard their portfolio because they need to move cash around or 1031. But as soon as that market goes neutral, and as soon as that market starts to cool off and become cold and its roles flip to a buyer and seller market, that psychology is endlessly important, because now you got to convince people to buy your property. And I think that is where you see better staging, better photography, better copy, full-blown video. It's remarkable when I always say this. Why do you see all the real estate agents half-assing pictures and not having Matterport links when the market's hot? They're like, oh, I don't need the expense. I'm going to throw it on the market. It's going to sell. Don't need to do anything. But as soon as this market slows, soon as it gets neutral to cold, that's when that psychology of understanding what the buyers are looking for is super important. And not to go in a rabbit hole here, but what I want to talk about is that understanding the right asset class and understanding your target demographic is also what has to do with psychology here. So if you know that 2-1s don't sell as fast, because usually the 3-2s are selling all the time, because those are either your move up buyers or your families, double income with kids. The psychology of what you might offer on a 2-1 versus psychology of what you might offer on a 3-2. You may overpay a little bit on a 3-2, because you know, if you do this right and you knock it out of the park and you have a great remodel, a great product. I'm going to give you an example of this. Somebody will buy it for the price that you want, because you psychology have thought about what our people's interests are. Okay, I'll give you an example. If you can find me a rundown, needs $100,000 in work, mid-century modern house in Eugene, under 350, it will list at 5.25 right now. There's 2 or 3 house flippers I know right now that have bought. I lost my bid at 375, all cash with a 15-day close, to a mid-century modern. 2 weeks later, another one was bought for 425. They're listed for 550. I've seen it upwards to 625. The houses are worth 350. Like, if you look at comps in comparison, they know that there's a right type of buyer for those. And the psychology is they want a mid-century modern. So you can craft your acquisition strategy. You can craft your sales plan, your remodeling, your finishes, to creating a product that you know that the buyers will pay, especially in a hot market with cash. And that there's 3 or 4 things or 5 things that you should always look for. The architecture of the house. Does it have a view? Is it close to walking distance to bars and restaurants? And I'm not talking about ones where college kids go, where people want to go. 4th thing, does it have space to garden or have an RV, boat, any type of outdoor sports storage? That's huge out here. People will pay more just for the pole barn that's behind it multiple times over. And also, last thing is, does it have low maintenance? So a lot of the newer generations of people, their psychology is, I'm busy, we're double income, we're professionals. We don't want a huge yard. We want low maintenance. So when you're looking at the product as a buyer, investor, and you're looking to say to yourself, what are we willing to offer on this property? You have to go through this psychological path, because if you don't understand who your end buyer is, you can end up putting yourself in either a lost money scenario, or I just made a whole crap load of money because I've thought about this and been able to execute it as much as possible. So we talked about distress, we talked about probate, we've talked about specific other types of investment property. And we've also talked about residential house flips where you can be able to craft that end product to be in alignment with the market.
I want to chime in on this conversation here, Dan.
Yeah.
Last month, I was working with a new wholesaler who brought me on to work the Eugene market area, and he's up in Salem. He just moved into Oregon from another state, and he was working probate and other kinds of house, like evictions and foreclosures. But anyways, there's a house in right off of Danabo area last month that I gave an offer representing him for $150,000. Property Max gave an offer of 180. The guy told me I needed to do 189 to beat to take the to take it, and this guy in Salem would not budge with that offer. All the comps show 150 with the renovation and all that kind of stuff was the right price. My comp showed that 180 was the right price to go for a low end, and I couldn't get him to budge. So 189 would not have been that much of a stretch. I want you to know that I talked to Mike Parrish afterwards, and that contract they sold for another $80,000. So they bought it at 180, sold it for 260. And the house is probably worth 300,000. You're talking like crazy property values right now. That is true. That is really happening right now. So yeah. So the flipper bought it for 260, and it needed some work, but it was moving ready enough if they wanted to turn it into a rental. I'm just chiming in because I think that property values are crazy high right now, really high.
Okay, so I showed one of Property Max's houses over on Dola Street.
Dola, was it
Total
Dola?
fixer. Yeah,
What?
Dola.
Yeah, that was the one. Dola. Yeah.
It was 220. They wanted 224, Property Max did. And they had a listed out of everything, the values, and it valued out 345 and all this. Well, first thing I did was run comps, CMAs, and one house had sold for more than a 300. One sold for 310, and the rest of the houses had one that was offered for 300, but nothing else came close to that. But the Property Max said, oh yeah, it's worth 345 by the AV, but it wasn't. So it was 220, and he showed so many dollars worth to repair it. And so after the fact, I emailed him, and then that he's wholesaled that house for 272.5.
Yeah.
And that house was not worth anything over 300 when it was done.
Even
And
more
it
than
needed-
80,000 they made. They made more than 80,000 on that wholesale contract then. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just telling you, that's the same house, 3 bedrooms,
Yeah.
1 bath maybe.
I
Vaulted
think it was
ceiling,
about don't have 1.5.
maybe 1.5. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. It was
and I
called
think
I talked to the police about it. It was called a flop house. They called it a flop house with the city of Eugene. So because it was a meth house with a whole lot of bicycle parts inside and stuff.
ooh, gotta love cleaning those walls.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, no, these are all good points because the velocity of the market, right, will dictate who is able to spend money. And I think we've seen that in many different markets. I think this is the first time I haven't lived here like in the first big boom in the late 90s, early 90s, whenever that happened. But this is the first time where I feel in a 30-40 offer scenario on some houses. And then when I look at prices, I'm like, wow, prices have gone up 11% in 1 month. That doesn't make sense. I've never seen anything like this. We're seeing a very
13.6% last year.
Yeah. I just saw a statistic like 2 days ago that home prices in one zip code in Eugene had gone up 11.7% in 30 days.
It's crazy.
I've never seen anything like that. So
Dan, did you Are you aware of our little house in Springfield, the little tiny one? Kevin
Yeah.
thought maybe you
Yeah,
didn't
tell
know
about
this.
that.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
bought this house, Property Max was offering it for 140, and we looked at it and said it needed a lot of work, and we were only willing to give 100. They renegotiated and sold it to us for 1025. At which time we thought, this was last November, we thought we would maybe be
get
able to
200.
sell it for between,
200.
we thought it was probably conservatively 185,
Okay.
but no more than 200. And when we listed it for 2099 and got 3 offers. The lowest one was 217. Then the next one was 230, and the highest one was 250 with 7,000 in concessions. So effectively 243. This house is less than 600 square feet.
I saw.
And we're
Oh.
talking from November till March.
It's asinine.
It's like my
It's
office.
asinine.
It has
And
no,
it appraised.
no room for
Just get
gardening.
the
in that
appraisal.
house.
It
No room
appraised.
for gardening.
Oh,
No
but you know what?
appraising.
Actually, there is room for gardening. My
Oh, okay.
sister, who is obsessive about gardening, walked up to it and said, "Oh, there's plenty of room here for gardening."
Oh, well, there you
She
go,
has raised
Dan.
beds, you know.
Your hypothesis is clear.
But
Yeah.
I have to tell you,
Yeah.
after hearing Grace's story about Property Max making all that money on that house in Danabo, I don't feel the least bit guilty about jewing them
Oh.
down to 1025.
And those are few and far between, right? Like it's not like
Oh,
Property
totally.
Max. It's just one of those things where I think the right now what we're seeing is that I'm dealing with a lot of, I think I talked about this today, was I'm dealing with a lot of inbound. This is the craziest thing. I've never had this happen to me. I'm getting calls or leads that are coming in as people looking for property, and like there's like this like franticness to them. They're like, hey, I'm looking for a property. Like I was on your website, and I'm like, oh, cool. How can I help you? I was like, can I answer any questions? Like, is it off market? Like on market? Like, what are you looking for? This is like the third or fourth person who has said, I have my house in contract and it's contingent about finding a downsizing house. So a house, I'm trying to retire and find something cheaper. And I was like, so how much is your house currently? And they're like, oh, we sold it. It's pending for like 4.25, 450, 550, whatever, in that range, at 400 to 600. And they're like, but we can't find anything for 225 to 275. And that's what our agent told us that we could downsize into. And I'm like, but you
Oh my
just
God.
downsized into the most competitive price point of the
Yeah.
entire city.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, that's anything below 300.
it's insane.
It's
I mean,
not-
that little, I couldn't believe we got, I mean, that house is so small. The price per
Yeah.
square foot is obscene. Yeah,
The patio is the living
it's
room.
beautiful. It's a beautiful house. I love it.
That house.
It's wild. So to put kind of like some bookends on it, like especially for sale by owners, and especially for anybody who has unrealistic expectations of what their house worth. Now, if a year ago we said that, we were pretty correct. But now people who have like even a remote, the properties that we see hit the market that need tons of work are typically not investors selling those houses or even investor agents selling those houses. There's a lot of inventory that we're seeing that is just absolutely 50 to 100 grand in work. But we're at the top end of the market where we got to be very careful as investors that we don't buy these properties and then all of a sudden interest rates rise a little bit, interest rates rise a little bit more, and now you just lost a quarter of the buyer pool. And so that's what I've been really telling everybody is just know your asset classes, know your target markets on who you're trying to go after, and don't try to go after 3, 4, 5 different targets. Pick like 1 or 2 per quarter and just like perfect your strategy, perfect your messaging, perfect your direct mail, because I think that's the ultimate way on how to create that scalability in your business, because we even deal with it on the investment side for, right now that we have a lot of buyers that are looking to 1031 and there's like really no inventory, but we have a lot of sellers that are landlords that have really bad assets. So it's this weird, like mixed up market that we're currently in, where I always ask myself, if an investment property is on the market, I say, what, the rent's $500 to $700. And it's like nearly 50% of them. But they want 1,200, 1,500 per unit type of valuation. And so I think we got to be patient. We got to understand that this market will not last. It will not last. And when these buyers start, I made a funny post on my Instagram and it made a couple of my friends really laugh. I took a picture of a house we sold a couple of months back and I flipped it completely upside down. And I said, hey, take a look at everyone's house in 2024 when they bought when the market was hot. They're now upside down. And I'm trying to make a joke about it, but it's not really that funny. We just have to be cautious to stacking our war chest now, getting as much profit, sitting back and remaining patient, because we need that shift in the market. As soon as the properties go down, the psychology of the seller is going to change. They're going to say, I need my equity out. I don't know where this is going, and I'm not going to hold through another cycle. And that's what we're already seeing in a lot of markets out of state, especially where COVID is really, like, let's be honest, like Oregon has 3 to 4 million people. We've been impacted by COVID. Everyone has. But there's certain states that got hit by COVID where we're seeing 40, 50, 60, 70 unit apartment complexes collecting 20 to 30% of the rent. That's not going to sustain. There's no way. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these bigger apartment complexes. Yes, Brad.
The thing to remember for everybody is your money is made when you purchase the house. Just like you found out where you're low. You got to buy it right. And if you buy it right, and even if you sit on it for, when I know that Kevin Saffron has sat on houses for a while, there's nothing wrong with that. But just don't buy on a whim and overpay. Do it out rather than overpay. You got to make the money when you buy, period.
Yep. It's good advice. Any questions? I wanted to leave with like one last example about psychology is that this multiple offers over asking velocity that we're seeing, the hysteria, the buyer agent chaos that's happening, it's causing a lot of real estate agents to get frustrated. And this is the first time in history when you can look at the top 1%, top 5% of real estate agents right now. We can pull them all up. I'm not going to mention any names, but these people usually had between 8 and 25 listings. Of all of these people, they have like 2 to 4, maybe 5 listings. They are listing agents. They have neglected buyers for years. They've pushed them off. They've referred them. I don't want buyers. I list houses. And now they are in a situation where they have tons of marketing overhead. They have tons of overhead for operations, assistants, TAs. And now they're sitting here saying, holy smokes, I have no listing inventory and I have no buyer pipeline. And I think as an investor, take that as a very good lesson in understanding. It doesn't matter if it's a buyer or seller, learn how to nurture, learn how to get them into your CRM and your database, and do what me and Ed do. I opened my phone call today, called a guy I hadn't talked in 6 months. Did it go anywhere? No, but I found he had an agent. And I was like, cool, I don't need to talk to you anymore. Delete. So you can be able to scrub your database, be able to clean through those opportunities and be able to keep in touch versus another guy that Ed's been in talk with who moved up here, but is set himself up on property alerts and is looking for investment properties. So it's that nurture pool of, it doesn't matter if buyer or seller, focus in on relationships and building relationships and having a machine to nurture those relationships as an investor or a real estate agent, because that, or an insurance agent, because that is ultimately going to lead to long-term longevity, more deal flow. I feel bad for listing agents right now. So
you should just feel bad for all of us realtors.
No.
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 No, I don't.
So one thing, I tell you what, everybody needs to think about is like, Dan and Ed are getting going. They're marketing in different ways, and all of the rest of us realtors that are we're all doing something different. So in a way, we're not competitors. The other day, I sent Dan the name of a guy, a commercial broker in a small town. I said, call him, and maybe he can send you all the cheap houses that he knows of. And I'm not, I don't deal in his market because he's a commercial broker, but he knows people. You reach out to the people you know.
Yep.
Times are tough.
That's
But don't be
100%.
so excited you overbuy. Don't
Yep.
buy on a whim because you just got to have another flipper.
Let me put some numbers in perspective, right? Always follow the data. The data doesn't lie. So know what the data is and listen to it, right? Take
What data?
everything in
What's that?
data from like Black Knight. Like I'll review it right here real quick. Like just keep in mind that we're at the peak. We're at the very, very peak, right? Just like Dan says, the roller coaster's coming up, tick, 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 tick. And as soon as it starts to come down, people's like, oh shit, I missed the bandwagon. I'm out of here, right? So it's that fear factor. People get kind of spooked, but the numbers like Black Knight as of last month. So you guys know Black Knight, they provide heaps of highly valuable data, right? According to Black Knight, there's currently 3.5 million people that are delinquent on their mortgages. So delinquent, different interpretations, like missed a payment, they're delinquent, okay? So 3.5 million people. There's
It's
an
one out of every 300 people, basically.
Yeah, there's an additional 2.2 million that are seriously delinquent. So that means 2 or more. 3, you got pre-foreclosure. So if you just keep that in perspective, right? Be conservative. If you can assume that 50% of those are going to turn into something, right? They have to come to the market. Those have to come to the market at some point. And you got to keep in balance the buyer pool. There's tons of people that are ready to buy, but as Dan pointed out last week and every week there before, interest rates are ticking up. Investor interest rates are ticking up, tick, 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 tick. Consumer interest rates, tick, 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 tick. It doesn't take a quarter point to half a point where those first-time home buyers, they can't afford that $300 a month more, $250 a month. So those people are going to fall back to, whoa, something happened on my screen. They're going to fall back to being in the renter pool, right? So just kind of keep in mind, just kind of be patient.
The best time to own moderate rental properties with good whole long longevity demand is in the first 12 months of a downswing market, because that's the highest point of people who they're getting foreclosed, they have to rent. And so occupancy and demand is the highest in the first 12 to 16 months of a demand change. And that is something to always keep in mind with your rentals, because that's essentially when you should increase rents, because there's way more demand for rentals. So that is your one opportunity to make your 9% increase like Oregon cap is, and then tell your tenants over 2 or 3 years, like, hey, just have every other year I'm going to do 9%. I have to do this to keep up with inflation. Like, if you don't like it, I got to come in and remodel your rent, and we'll start over, and it'll be 1,600. So don't be afraid. And I always say, we interviewed a guy who owned 22 rental properties 2 days ago, me and Ed. He's selling them, 6 million. And he said, I have people that my dad rented to who are paying like, what was it? Ed, please quote it.
It's $35. $35. I shit you not.
$5 a month for a unit.
Oh my God.
I've never heard of it in my entire life. I had to look at the numbers and be like, whoa, is this like the cable bill?
My beer bill.
No.
The cable bill is more than that.
Yeah,
19
not even, right. It's crazy.
So just in psychology, don't get into the rental market if you have a heart that is going to feel for people and be like, hey, you're a month late, now you're 2 months late, like I'm not going to evict you, it's cool. Or I don't want to raise rents, because what you're in then is you're in the community service business. You're in a nonprofit business at this point. And I just wanted to keep that in mind. Like I say that because every different type of business, doesn't matter if you own a hair salon or a car wash or a restaurant. You wouldn't walk into a restaurant, drink 3 beers, eat a burger, have a dessert, and then be like, sorry, I forgot my wallet, can't pay you. Just doesn't happen. So housing is one of those, hierarchy of needs. You need housing in your comfort, and people will pay for it. And if you're going to get into lower income type of housing, then get into Section 8 or subsidized. Like, be able to rely on the government and being able to provide that opportunity. But I told my grandpa that when growing up. I said, do not raise rents in a market where it's super hot. Raise rents when the market starts to cool down, because that's when the demand is happening. And that's where you're going to be able to reposition yourself. Because right now you can find rentals.
Yeah, so Dan, I'm thinking what you're basically concluding on this conversation about calling the owners is to call people that own rentals. And I've been focusing on probates, but to focus on people that are owning rentals right now, where the government said, you can't evict for non-payment. And it's been over a year of this kind of stuff. It's a good time to start making a conversation with people that own rentals and warm up and hopefully start owning some rental units again. Right, Ed?
The biggest.
Always a good time for rentals.
Yeah. I was going to leave with this, is that the average rental owner is over 68 years old. So if you look at that in perspective, the most rental properties are owned by individuals over 68 years old or held into a trust in which 30 to 60 years old, no, let's be 40 to 60 years old is the biggest demographic of people who've inherited those properties from people who have passed away in their 70s and 80s. So I can tell you this, guys, investing is hot. It's a good topic and everyone likes it. But my generation, like 37 below, they don't want rental properties. They want to drive around Ferraris and live in Newport Beach and drink beer every day. They don't care about rental properties. They want cash. And that's unfortunate, but that's good. That's good to know.
Cool cars and fast women.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Wait, that's 50. Never mind.
So, yeah, good topic. Any questions before we call tonight? Cool. Good. Awesome. Well,
good night, all.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah,
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. That was awesome.
for sure.
Keep us motivated. Woohoo.
Definitely. And then Ed, I will give you a call here in 1 minute. Just want to.
Right.
And Ed, I like your new X shirt.
Oh, you like it?
Yeah, I love the color. I love the logo. It looks great.
Yeah,
Looking good.
Yep, looking good. Dan's design.
Yeah. Dan's not wearing his, but you got yours on.
He was at a meeting, so
I was at a meeting.
I was gardening. He came to my house and it wasn't working. I was gardening.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Good to see you,
All right.
everybody. Have a good
Thank you,
weekend.
everyone.
Yep.
Good night.
Everybody have a good night.
Bye.
Okay.